Hello, this is Dr. Lori Ernstberger, and welcome to Behavioral Training Resource Center. Today's topic is providing behavioral supports to students with disabilities. As many of you may know, on August 1st, 2016, the U.S. Department of Education, along with OSERS, sent out a Dear Colleague letter explaining how schools can best provide behavioral supports for students who exhibit challenging behaviors. And what I would like to do today is just give you my 3 take-home messages from that Dear Colleague letter. And these are not intended to be legal advice, just Dr. Lori's summary of that complicated and rather lengthy letter sent out by the U.S. Department of Education. So take-home message number 1, if you have a student who exhibits challenging behavior, the IEP team must consider behavioral supports. So under special factors, the question that asks, does the student's behavior impede his or her learning or that of others? If you have a student, regardless of the disability, if the child is exhibiting patterns of misbehavior, then you want to write in behavioral supports. And that starts with present levels. So present levels of functional performance are going to include any disciplinary records, if you have observational data from teachers, or any kind of assessment data or evaluation that's been done on the student's current functional performance when it comes to behavior. So that's a take-home message 1. If the student's exhibiting problem behaviors, if these are repeated patterns, regardless of the disability, you must consider behavioral supports. The second step clearly states that those behavior supports have to be considered throughout that IEP document. So under special education and related services, under supplementary aids, accommodations, modifications, you want to write as an IEP team member, you want to make sure that you include specific areas such as consultation, anger management classes, social skills training, other life skills instruction. Maybe you're going to be doing behavioral contracts with the student. You want to include research-based, so evidence-based interventions, and they should be clearly and concretely outlined in that IEP as behavioral supports. So regardless if the child has hit that 10-day rule or not, if you have a student who has been, let's say, suspended for 2 or 3 days, they've had multiple office referrals, they've been excluded from a course or a class, kicked out of PE, removed from the cafeteria, you've had phone calls home to mom and dad, all of those disciplinary measures can lead to the conclusion of the IEP team that this is a student who needs behavioral supports. Not considering those behavioral supports could constitute a denial of FAPE. And then take-home message number 3, you want to make sure you review and revise that document, that IEP, and those behavioral supports as necessary. So let's say the school year has started, and now again you start to see patterns of behavior. The student is removed from class. The student is getting detention. They've been sent home for the day a couple of times where mom and dad have been called. Maybe there's a suspension or 2. If that is occurring in the first 8 weeks when you're doing your progress monitoring, that's a red flag. That means that behavioral supports that are written into the IEP are either A, not being implemented, or B, they're not meeting the unique needs of that child. So step 1, if you have a child with disabilities and they exhibit challenging behaviors, and we know, the whole team knows that this has been a pattern of behavior, then you must consider behavioral supports. Step 2, write them in the IEP and make sure they're very obvious, they're very concrete, that you've written these specific supports for that student that are based on the research and evidence-based practices. And then step 3, if you continue to see a pattern, so over 6 to 8 weeks, if you continue to see that pattern of misbehavior, and again, it doesn't have to meet the 10-day rule. It may just be exclusionary practices like timeout or removal, detentions, phone calls, taken in its entirety can show that IEP team we need to review. Is that IEP being implemented to fidelity? which check out my how-to course on implementation fidelity checklist. And the second step is maybe we need to update what those behavioral supports are. Maybe we need to add some, or we need to change the ones that we have. Now, one thing, a take-home message, a little bonus here, and I love that OSERS included this in the letter, is that you don't have to reconvene the entire IEP team to make a revision, to modify your behavioral supports. If you as the teacher of record, the LEA representative, administrator, and the parent get together, you can quickly, within a couple of days, make those necessary modifications and then distribute what your decisions were to the rest of the IEP team. So I know that for some students, they have quite a large group of IEP team members, and we don't want to wait 6 weeks to try to get that meeting together. We want to be able to review the data after 6 to 8 weeks. If the misbehavior, those patterns, ongoing misbehaviors are continuing, we want to make revisions, and then, as with all things in special education, document, document, document. Get that document signed, put it in that permanent record so that you can be held accountable for making data-based decisions. So if you want to learn about behavioral supports and other classrooms management suggestions, go to behavioraltrainingresourcecenter.com and you can look up our library of courses. I will see you in class.